Okay, looking at the chat, and then we'll get into the big news that has happened since. Donut Batman says, video about all the conspiracies about why he's called the election now and with such short notice. Sorry, I personally like he's throwing the party under the bus because they're trying to get rid of him. I don't think there's any sort of major conspiracy. I think this is just a shambles, right? I think this is sort of Occam's razor. Is that the correct razor? Occam's that sometimes people just aren't good at things. I mean, wasn't it quite the announcement? Maybe the football plays into it. The football is afterwards, though. Do you think so? Damn girl saying I think it's the football. What do we think that Rishi Sunak worried that Keir Starmer could play up his guy who likes football thing enough that could play it out? Tweety says most plausible I've heard is Sunak personally having another job lined up, but I don't quite believe that Number 10 and the Tory machinery would go along with that. So the Prime Minister calls the election. There's not sort of necessarily a huge amount of approval, well, other than the approval, of course, of His Majesty the King. Oh, Armin Cook saying maybe he's hoping that the football Labour fans won't vote. Well, everyone will be too busy at the thing. I mean, let's find this.
You met that challenge, and then some.
Wait, sorry.
And I have never been prouder to be British.
There's just so much of it that really, like, even before it properly starts to rain, there's like squealing going on. Someone keeps knocking the... So this will be a kind of like press pool camera. So there'll be basically, rather than the BBC, Sky, ITV and everyone all having separate cameras that he's sort of having to compete for, everyone will be going, they'll sort of be like, we'll all pitch in. Or the BBC will volunteer to have their camera person there and film it, and then the feed will get sent to everyone. Like, just the fact that the camera keeps sort of getting knocked every so often.
Action, but by the small acts of kindness that we showed one another. You met that challenge, and then some.
I imagine maybe it's on like a slightly long lens, because the sort of press pen is over one side of the street and he's over the other, so to get that kind of mid shot.
In truth, it was no choice at all. I have never and will never.
It's just really funny to watch what is, at least in the most, like, at least in a very minor sense, like a historical moment, right? One prime minister resigning, and just like every so often it's just like, and like the fact that you can just hear everyone chatting, it's just, it's so, I was going to say disgraceful. That's not quite like, but it's so lacking in. Like, he's chosen to do it in front of 10 Downing Street rather than in the inside media room. Like, he's going for the kind of, like, looking prime ministerial, and just the whole thing falls apart. Like, I think, in theory, this isn't a bad speech. He does a whole kind of like, remember furlough? For anyone not watching, not from the UK, sort of during COVID, Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, so the politician that's in charge of sort of the government money, for want of a better word, and he introduced a system of furlough whereby companies, where the government would pay 80% of someone's wages to kind of encourage companies to keep workers on, even if they didn't necessarily need them at that given moment in time. And so it sort of made sense that he was like, remember me, I'm the furlough guy. He does a bit later where he talks about Keir Starmer not being super trustworthy and being like a bit flip-floppy on policies and stuff, which, like, in theory is like, this all makes sense. These are sort of good narratives potentially to be kind of fluffing up ahead of an election. But just all of the context just undercuts it so badly.
And you know that because you've seen it. As I did then, I will forever do everything in my...
Yeah, he's eat out to help out guy, right? He really, I think, like, at the beginning of the speech, I was like, okay, this at least makes some sense. I guess maybe he doesn't want to push eat out to help out too much because, in retrospect, eating out did not help out in terms of COVID that much, did it? It sort of helped boost another wave. I say that as someone who really helped out. I feel like I helped out a lot, you know. I feel like I'm not going to finish that sentence because That would be a clippable one.
We were hit by a pandemic that upended normal life. Who would have thought that the government would ever tell us how many times a day we could leave our homes?
I always feel like he's like, the bloody government, as though he's not the Prime Minister. I think if this was me, I would do a short... I wouldn't. Obviously, I wouldn't. I can't. In writing videos or, like, my wedding speech, I've never been able to write a short speech. But, in theory, at least, I would do a short speech to kind of avoid it having the chance of raining, at least. It's the fact, like, there's a real comedy value to the fact that it starts off, like, at the beginning, it's like, there's like maybe a couple of specks of rain here. There's sort of like, so there's really good sort of foreshadowing of what's going to happen. And then it just sort of, it gradually just builds. And you're like, mate, just skip to the end. Just skip to the end bit.
2 major milestones in
just
delivering
such a
that
long
stability.
speech.
Showing that when we work together, anything is possible.
Okay, and then Steve Bray turns up. Who, I'm not a fan of Steve Bray, to be honest. I don't really have I just, like, so for anyone that doesn't know, Steve Bray is, it says activist, like, yeah, I guess he's an activist. Okay, here we go. Oh my goodness, what a guy. Sorry, I'm fascinated now. Sorry, he was a self-employed sort of coin specialist? What? Sorry, where's this money from? Okay, so basically, this is a guy who, during the Brexit debate, so after the Brexit referendum had been voted through, there was this long period where it wasn't entirely clear exactly what sort of Brexit itself was going to look like, or kind of like what the UK's relationship with the EU was going to look like going forward. Was it going to be a quote-unquote hard Brexit where we had sort of no formal relationship whatsoever? Was it going to be that we stayed in the customs union in some way? Was it going to be that we made sure we had like a really robust trade deal before we left? And his whole thing was that I guess he didn't want Brexit to happen. He was very much Theresa May's shadow? Is that what Jordan Peterson would call it? If Theresa May's thing was as Tweety is saying, Brexit means Brexit, which sort of broadly just meant the best Brexit is sort of the most Brexit. He was like the opposite, and his thing was just we shouldn't do it at all. So his thing was that he would just stand outside Parliament and go, "Stop Brexit." Like, just all of the time. I guess it was one of those where the idea was just to kind of broadly keep the idea of not Brexiting in the public debate, I guess.
Hi, I'm Steve, otherwise known as Stop Brexit Man.
It outpaced inflation, which is good news for people.
Like, this was his whole thing for like a couple of years. VO5100 says Bray got banned from Parliament and around Whitehall. Yeah, I think so, because he one of the Public Order Acts that got passed in the last bunch of years included like an additional restriction on having like amplified music or amplified like stuff if you didn't have a permit, and sometimes he would have that.
Stop Brexit!
And amazingly, like, this just was his entire sort of strategy. This wasn't kind of part of any sort of wider political plan. It was just kind of shouting "Stop Brexit" for a couple of years. I'm fascinated now about this guy's backstory. Just like, yeah, it really is one of those where you're like, this is a really interesting thing to have entirely dedicated yourself to. There's definitely an aspect to this. Okay, so the reason I'm talking about this is, so partway through the speech in which Rishi Sunak is announcing that the election will come, Steve Bray turns up. In fact, I think there was another video of him here with a speaker system. Oh, there's such an energy to having this kind of sort of like Menkind or whatever. Like, this is very much like one of those things that you get in like a sort of trinket shop with the sort of light up letters. Yeah, no, that sign is entirely designed to have "Live, Laugh, Love" written on it. It has three tiers just for that. So this is sort of the other side of that.
Germany, France, and the United States. And this morning it was confirmed that inflation is back to normal. This means that the pressure on prices will ease and mortgage rates will come down.
I mean, yeah, like
This is proof that the plan...
it's easy to mock sincerity. He clearly has a thing he believes in, and I don't necessarily think his strategy... I mean, we know his strategy didn't work, but yeah, I do sometimes wonder whether people who are, I don't know, about the complexity of the kind of like extreme Remainers' understanding of the European Union as an institution. Like, it is kind of funny that Rishi Sunak had this song playing behind him. I don't quite understand the desire to then give Steve Bray 250 quid. Playing the song has got tips of £1,284. That's not a bad day at the office. Okay, I understand how this guy could afford to just stand outside Parliament all day, every day for the best part of 2 years now. Apart from Lee West, who commented, "Get a job, you melt."
Some of you will only just be starting to feel the benefits. And for some, it might still be hard when you look at your bank balance. But this hard-earned economic stability was only ever meant to be the beginning.
I'd love to know what was going on in his head during this. Yeah, so sorry, as Tweety's saying in the chat, for anyone watching not from in the UK, this is the song that was used in Labour's 1997 campaigning. There's this like incredibly cheesy, incredibly 90s video that I think was the one that went out like the day before the election. It goes a little bit like this. I sort of I do kind of love this advert in the same way that I love the music video for I Know Him So Well. And it's just loads of people like being really, oh yeah, sorry, that guy drops his ballot and has to like run after it. It's a whole thing. You later find out that this guy is Tony Blair. Like it's very much of its decade in a way that this music video is of the previous decade. Yeah, 1984. They just capture like the sort of television video aesthetic of each period. Anyway, and so that is why this particular song is being blasted out to drown him out. For me, I don't know why it's this. It's the bits where the camera gets knocked every so often, and he's just like doing this speech, and it's just like... So Sunak does this speech, right? I mean, he's trying to kind of get his vision of what the election is about in early, right? Which sometimes prime ministers have done relatively well, and sometimes it backfires. So the famous one is probably Ted Heath, who called an election. This was sort of during the 70s. There's oil crises. There's unions going on strike. And Ted Heath kind of calls this election. And he's like, who governs Britain? Is it Parliament or is it the unions? And he's like, and in doing that, he kind of like sets up what the election's going to be about. He's like, these are the issues. Similarly, like Theresa May or Boris Johnson going like, this is the Brexit election. Brexit is going to be the topic that we're going to be talking about. And I think what Sunak is trying to do is trying to go, you know, this election is about remember me. I'm the furlough guy. And about going, Keir Starmer can't be trusted on anything. Are you really going to put your faith in him? And so that's why it's longer than it necessarily feels like it needs to be. But it did feel like it really went on. Yeah, okay, so as Vio's saying in the chat, the next thing that happened was that this was kind of like the official legal launch of the election campaign. And then Sunak had kind of booked a sort of event where he could then be surrounded by activists and such and other MPs on a big stage in a slightly more kind of, I guess, US political convention type scenario for later in the day. And Sky News turned up to film it.
And just the state of the economy.
Which presumably they want, right? They're holding this event so that they can have the media there filming it. And there was some kind of mix up with press credentials. And so they then had the brilliant kind of electoral stunt of having one of the nation's prime news broadcasters filming themselves being kicked out of the event.
Few minutes, and I'm being forcibly removed. We just simply wanted to have access tonight at Sky News, but unfortunately, we're told that because there are pool arrangements in place, we're not allowed to be here. This is, by the way, what we're trying to film is the campaign event where the Prime Minister is due to speak in the next couple of minutes. It's in front of...
Okay, so to clarify, a sort of pool arrangement is like what I was talking about a little bit earlier, for those of you that were here for that. Basically, it's so that often in scenarios where a politician or someone is doing a speech and it needs to be filmed, what they'll do is a bunch of broadcasters will get together and go, you know, we're going to have one camera person, and then there are, rather than having like 5 people all filming the same speech, and that has the benefits both of not needing to double up on paying like 5 people to do something that one person could do, and also it means that the person giving the speech can kind of look down the lens of the camera, right, and it can feel a bit more natural than if they were having to do this all the time, and if half the time they were looking off camera, like here or here. And so there's at least a logic here, I guess, that that there's a pool arrangement in place, and therefore they don't want to let Sky News in, but it's probably not a great look to just be kicking them out whilst they're filming.
But as you can see, we just don't have access to it. It's not entirely clear why we don't have access to it. But as I say, this was meant to be the campaign launch for the Prime Minister, for the Conservative leader.
I mean, they've timed it brilliantly to be able to go to him whilst they're filming it.
We're probably going to have to leave at this stage because we're going to lose contact. We have to go into an elevator through security.
Saying we're going to have to go into an alligator instead of an elevator is enjoyable to me. There's a great bit, I don't know if I'm going to find it, but there's a great bit later on when he's gone outside. Oh yeah, and it's next to the river, so he's walking along past the river, and he's just walking along the side of the building with the river on one side, the building on the other, and the security guard's still following him to make sure he goes off site. Vio says this is the weirdest thing that happened in an election campaign since Trump's team accidentally booked a press conference between a crematorium and a dildo shop. I mean, Boris Johnson hiding in a fridge was pretty good. This was in 2019, and he was being asked questions.
Morning, Prime Minister. Will you come on Good Morning Britain, Prime Minister? I've just had a reaction here from one of the minders. Prime Minister, we have an earpiece in my pocket. You're more than welcome to come on.
And he just goes into a walk-in fridge.
I'll be with you in a second.
Yeah, I have an earpiece here in my hands, ready to go.
He just goes back into the fridge.
It's been taken inside, into the freezer.
He's gone into the fridge.
Like, that was a pretty good moment.